Sara Guerrero. I tried to get her boss, Gordon Frankie, and he was committed. And he said, oh, once you hear Sara talk, you'll wonder why you ever wanted to ask me. So Sara's with the high praise, especially from your boss. I mean, that's pretty nice. So Sara's with the UC Berkeley Bee Lab, and she's going to tell us all about bees and some stuff about plants.
I know a little bit about that.
Yeah. Hi everyone, can everyone hear me? First of all, I'm gonna try to stay put for the camera. I have a tendency, my boss says I do the Italian version of the talk. I like to move around, use my hands, do a little interpretive dance. I figure no one can fall asleep with me that way. So bear with me if I occasionally go off screen. And I don't usually use the mic. I actually have a pretty loud voice, so this is gonna be constraining for me. So if I start waving my hands around and you can't, can everybody hear me when I do this? Just in case? Okay.
You have to use it.
Well, because I tend to get excited, and so if my arm goes over there, just ask me to repeat things if you can't hear me at all. My other little caveat for my talks is I tend to get really excited when I start talking about bees and start speaking really quickly. So if I say something, particularly a scientific name of a plant or a bee, and you don't get any of it, please just ask me to repeat myself. It happens a lot, actually. Let's see. My other thing is I'm really big on audience participation. I speak a lot to college groups where students, unless you engage them, they just it goes right over their heads. So I'm really used to calling on people and being like, tell me what you think about things. So I really, I would like you to, if you see something on screen, I glaze over something, you have a question, please do ask it to me. If we start getting too bogged down with questions, I might move on. I know it can just turn into a discussion, but I do enjoy your questions throughout rather than save till the end. So make sure you don't forget them. So to start off, I'm going to tell you about who we are. So we are the UC Berkeley Urban Bee Lab, and we do have a mission statement, which is to protect and restore native bees by furthering the understandings between bees, plants, and people. Because those relationships, humans touch nearly everything in this world. There isn't really a landscape that we haven't touched. We have a huge impacts on the organisms and the plants that we interact with every day, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in our lab, we are bee-centric, but we also care about those three factors, bees, plants, and people, and how they interact and what we can do to actually help preserve these organisms. So, and that's, let's see, where's my pointer? That's my boss right there, Dr. Gordon Frankie. That's the bee man at a private home garden that was designed by Kate Fry. Very, charismatic feature. So we have a number of projects in the Urban Bee Lab. Our main work for many years was the California Native Bee Survey, where we actually went to 15 different cities in California and surveyed home gardens, community gardens, botanic gardens. There's actually a couple partners here in our room that we have worked with in the past. We also, since 2009, we're invited by USDA to take our knowledge of bee-plant relationships in urban areas and apply them to agricultural settings. And that's what I do primarily. I primarily work with farmers to install native bee habitat on their farms to supplement honeybee pollination. And don't get me started on that. I can talk about that for hours. If any of you are curious, I'll be around all day. We can chat about that. And then we have our outreach project, which this is part of, the Buzz About Bees. And then we do a similar work in Costa Rica. And we have a citizen science project where we actually, every year in June, we go up to the city of Sonoma and work with 10 different citizen scientists. And we teach them how to collect and pin and process and even do some basic identifications of native bees in the Sonoma County area. And we're actually in our 5th year of that, and we're preparing a peer-reviewed publication on, one, the benefits of citizen scientists and what they can contribute to the scientific literature, as well as long-term monitoring, which I'll talk a lot about when we go through the information that I'm going to go through today. So that's just a little bit about who we are, what we do, why should you believe anything that I'm telling you up here today, and that's it. So I just added these, so forgive the fact that these slides are not perfectly formatted to the rest of these. So I'd like to start off with a little quiz. So everybody just either raise your hand when I say true or false. So true, this is a native bee. Who thinks that? Yeah? Okay, who doesn't think it's a native bee? It's okay. Oh, come on, I see a lot of people not raising their hands. It's okay. Come on, you guys. I give a talk to Mr. Chris Nutter's class up there in 4th grade, and they are so eager to answer these questions. Come on, you guys. Hope you show up by fourth graders. So those of you who said true, you are absolutely correct. This is a native bee. This is actually one of our masked bees, Hylaeus punctatus, and it's smaller than a grain of rice. So yeah, challenging what you guys think of as bees, right? So true. This is a native bee. No? Okay. How many of you think it's false? Okay, those of you, somebody, tell me why.
It's a wasp.
It's a wasp? Why do you think it's a wasp?
It's got a waist.
It's got a waist? Okay. That's an interesting idea. Wings going back? Okay, these are interesting characteristics. Long antenna. These are interesting ideas. I've never heard these before. So. True. This is absolutely a native bee. This is a cuckoo bee. This is a nomada. I'll tell you more about cuckoo bees in a little bit, but does everybody know what a cuckoo bird is? Yeah. So these do very much the same things. They're kleptoparasites that take over the nests of other bees and have them rear out their, well, not technically rear out, they do with bumblebees, but basically they use the resources in the other bee's nest to produce their young. So yeah, looks very wasp-like. Okay, last one. True, this is a native bee. Raise your hand. Yeah? Okay. False. False. I see a lot of people who are unsure on this one. Okay, those of you who think it's a native bee, why? Why do you think it's a native bee?
Cute.
It's cute? Oh, I like that. I don't know, did you think that last bee was cute? I think it's pretty cool. I don't know if it's cute. Any other reasons?
This is a native bee talk.
That's true. It is a native bee talk. Why would I be talking about anything but bees? That's a very good question. Anything else? It could be a European bee. Oh, false. This is not a bee at all. This is actually a syrphid fly. No antenna. Yes, it does not have antennae. Very good. So this is what we call in our lab. So we're full of these in our lab. Really bad bee puns. So this is what we call a wannabe. That's what these are, yeah. So, and I like to throw up these 3 photos, mostly because we like to challenge what people think of traditionally as a bee. We have our garden open, once a year to the Bringing Back the Natives garden tour. And I had this lovely couple come in, and the husband was deciding to be a little difficult, and he's going around going, if it's not yellow and black striped, it's not a bee. He's like, that's what makes it a bee. And the wife's sitting there going, no, bees come in all different shapes, colors, and sizes. And I was like, yes, exactly. But, typically people often think, if it's not yellow and black striped, like a honeybee or a bumblebee, it can't be a bee. It's got to be something else. But from these photos, I just demonstrated that things that look like bees may not be bees, and things that you have seen many times in your garden might be bees. So you might be seeing bees all the time, and you just haven't trained your eyes to recognize them yet. So, on that note, to demonstrate, do you have a question?
What makes it a bee?
What makes it a bee? That is a really excellent question. So, if you were to ask our taxonomist, Dr. Robbin Thorp, who is one of the world's experts on California native bees, he would tell you branched hairs. And that's absolutely useless for most people. But technically, that is what makes a bee. And basically what that means is bees have evolved to collect pollen. The branched hairs on their bodies, let's see if we could actually see any of them up here. So this bee, this is actually a male. If this were a female, here we go. Our ultra green up here. You see she's got pollen all on her legs. And so on those legs are specific hairs that are branched. If you looked at them under a really high-powered microscope, you would see them branched. And that's to basically hold pollen onto their bodies. If you look at wasps, wasps don't have branched hair because at one point in their evolutionary history, bees and wasps split off. And wasps are carnivorous. Except there's one exception. They're called pollen wasps. They do eat pollen. But in general, most wasps are carnivorous. They're going after pest insects in your garden. Or in the case of the non-native yellow jacket, they're going after your hamburgers at your barbecues. And in general, native bees are all bees are vegetarians, or as Chris's fourth graders corrected me one time, they're herbivores, not vegetarians. But they are going after the pollen and nectar of your plant. So that's really what differentiates them. And flies are a little bit different, but the main way you can tell apart flies and bees. So this is a good example. Is one, this is kind of a surface. It doesn't really differentiate them. But when you look at flies, they have what I call these big fly eyes. They have these two really prominent, compact eyes. Whereas bees tend to be, you can't really see it here, but they're not as fly looking. But really, the main difference is that flies have one set of wings. They only have this one set of 4 wings. And bees have 4 wings. They have a set of 4 wings and a set of back wings, hind wings. So that's really the main way you can tell. Okay, so, sorry, what was I talking about? Does that answer your question of what makes it a bee? Did I answer that perfectly? Okay, that's the other thing I have to check in. I go off on tangents, and sometimes I might not actually answer your question. One more caveat on questions. With the 1,600 species we have in California, there's a lot that we do not know about bees. So sometimes I get really great questions, and my only response can be, that is an excellent question, and I have no idea. So, which makes it really exciting as a researcher. It means that there's a lot that we can still look into. But from an information aspect, we have a lot of knowledge gaps. So, let me get some water. Okay. Too much coffee this morning. I drove in from Oakland. So, okay. Worldwide, we have about 20,000 described species of bees. And when I say described species, that's just the number that we have currently either recorded in genus or to species. So when the taxonomists and the geneticists stop arguing over where we should divide certain things, we could get up to as many as 25 or 30,000 species worldwide. In the US and Canada, we have about 4,000 of those species. And in California, we have 1,600 alone, 40%. To give you a little bit of perspective, Gordon, my boss, used to work in Texas, and they have probably about 400 species of native bees. My former colleague, Jamie Poelick, used to work in Florida, and they have about 350 species of bees. So, why is that?
Plant diversity.
Yeah, good. I love talking to native plant groups. Yes, plant diversity and location. God, in California, we have nearly every type of ecotype you can imagine. We've got all these different wonderful plant communities. We have, I don't know if this number is still correct. Last I heard it was about around 6,000 flowering plant species here in California. And that's just, that number is just astronomical compared to most of the United States. So our bee diversity directly reflects that. So let's see. Yes, in case you didn't already get the gist from my earlier spiel. There's huge variation among species. Each bee has its own story, and obviously still a lot we have to learn. I love these 3 photos because they demonstrate really interesting behaviors adapted to native plants. So, does everybody recognize this plant? Yeah, one of those manzanitas, right? So, manzanitas are a really interesting flower because they got this bell shape. Things, even really small bees can't really get into this flower. Honeybees try to go to them, and they can't really do much. They haven't been evolved with these flowers. They haven't adapted to them. So it really takes a large, robust bee with a long proboscis, long mouth parts, to actually get in there and get to those resources. And with even larger bees, like the bumblebees, they can actually buzz pollinate this and get it to drop its pollen, whereas honeybees can't. So these are just interesting behavioral adaptations that native bees have with native flowers. This is another really interesting one. Does everybody recognize the flower?
Yes.
Yeah. Penstemon heterophilus, yeah, or heterophila, depending on who you're talking to. So, does anybody know what's interesting about the penstemon flowers? About the stamen? No? So if you look at the stamen and where they are located in the flower, they're pressed up against the top of a flower, but the nectaries are at the base of it. So if a small bee comes in here looking for nectar, it goes directly to the base of the plant and doesn't actually touch the reproductive parts of a plant. The bumblebees, our native bumblebees, have learned this. And when they fly up to this flower, they fly up and then they crawl in upside down to scrape the top of the flower for the pollen. They're the only bees we've witnessed doing this. And then this one, this is wonderful. This is in a Malacathamnus. I'm not sure which species. It's down in the desert. And does anybody know what this bee is doing in here? Sleeping. This bee is sleeping. Yes. This is a male bee who crawled into this flower sometime in the afternoon and it closed up around him like a little sleeping bag. Yeah. So, whoever told you bees and insects aren't cute has never seen these photos, obviously. So just, as I mentioned, native bees have evolved with native flowering plants. And you can learn a lot about both the plants and the bees by studying both of them. Some groups only study bees, some groups only study plants, and for us, they go hand in hand. So this is one of our classic, wonderful photos. All these photos are done by Dr. Rollin Coville, who's the photographer in our lab. He also, if anybody's heard of our book, California Bees and Blooms, he did all the bee photos in that book. He's absolutely phenomenal. So this is our, which one is this? It's the carpenter bee, but we have like 3 different types of large carpenter bees. I think this is not the valley carpenter bee, this is the mountain carpenter bee. Anyway, it's the smallest of our large carpenter bees, Xylocopa tabaniformis. It's the one you're gonna most commonly see around here. It's rather small, it's about the size of a bumblebee, but this is a Salvia brandigii flower. And you can tell that this bee is going in for nectar. But this plant has perfectly evolved when this large bee comes in to deposit the pollen all along her back. So, that's just a perfect example of coevolution. You do not see that with honeybees and the non-native bees that we have here. This is another, I know a couple of you have taken our bee course at Hastings. This is one of the classic stories from Dr. Robbin Thorp of the Hesperapis regularis. And this is a wild form of Clarkia unguiculata. It's a really weird plant. I can't even do justice to the story, but it has a really interesting reproductive biology. And it's got one of the weirdest flowers. And this is the only bee, it's a specialist bee, that can visit this and actually pollinate it because of its weird biology. It's one of those obligate pollinators on that. This is one of our cactus bees, Lythyrgus. Any of you live in any dry, hot areas, these are the guys you're gonna see visiting our cactus. Has anybody ever planted squash in their garden and not gotten any squash? Yeah. You didn't have enough of these guys. These are our squash bees, Pepinapis pruinosa, which are specialists on everything in the Cucurbita genus. So any of your squashes, and they just follow these squash plants around. They're actually the #1 commercial pollinator of squashes in the nation. It's one of our few crops that is not predominantly pollinated by honeybees. And it kind of confuses people because one, they look rather honeybee-like. And the other thing is honeybees will visit squash flowers later in the day, but these bees are out around like 5 o'clock in the morning visiting, so they're doing the brunt of the pollination. And if you've ever gone out about midday when your squash flowers have closed up, you can actually go around squeezing flowers and you might hear a little buzz in there. And that's the male squash bee sleeping in there, waiting for the flower to open the next morning for the females to come in. So, little fun facts. Does anybody have any questions about these? Yes?
So I find it interesting that an agricultural plant, this bee has evolved with one? Is that how it
Well, they evolved with things within the Cucurbita genus, and we have native Cucurbitas.
Okay.
So, that's one of those things that, they're adapted to a specific genus, and, we bring in these, non-native agricultural, and they're like, oh, this works pretty well for us too. So, and the only way we really know to increase their populations is plant more squash. And if you're not getting them, then I guess you have to go out and do, what they do in the Chinese pear orchards, which is hand pollinate. That's what happens when you don't have bees. Any other questions? I saw a hand up.
How do they find the squash flowers? Particularly if you're planting a squash flower far away from any other populations of it.
So if you're probably planting one squash flower, probably not going to show up. It's just one of those things. This is one of the things we don't understand well about bees is exactly why they're attracted to certain things than others. But the main thing we can accept is that native bees are constantly searching. It's plugged into their biology. Because if you know about California native plants, in the wild, California native plants have a typically short flowering season, for the most part, if they don't get supplemental water. So native bees have been genetically programmed that when a plant is about half done flowering, they start searching for other resources because they know that that resource will not be around for all that much longer. So that works in our favor when we plant habitat gardens because it means you don't have to wait to see some results. Pretty much, if you plant a habitat garden, bees will show up almost immediately. And it's because it's plugged into their genetic makeup to constantly search out new resources. And that is the best answer I have for that question of why squash bees seek out squash flowers. They might come out with some more data when they get done looking at the biology and genetics of them. But again, great question. And all I can say is they're searching. I do a lot of natural history in the lab. So oftentimes what I do is just sit and observe and then describe what I see. And then I'm like, they're not talking. I'm just writing down what they're doing, So, Okay, just to give you some more example of common native bees in Bay Area gardens that you might be seeing. I'm sure everybody recognizes this very charismatic bumblebee, our yellow-faced bumblebee, and its closely related cousin, our black-tailed bumblebee, which is a little fuzzier, a little more yellow. Bumblebee identification can be actually very complicated. It seems like they should be easy to recognize, but this bee, actually, when you take it to other elevations, all of a sudden it gets a orange stripe on its back, which looks very similar to other bees. So just know, in general, these are our two most common ones, but depending where you live, you're probably going to get a lot of other interesting bumblebees out there. This is one of our digger bees, Anthophora urbana, very common. Common right now, actually, into mid-summer into early fall. This is a small carpenter bee, Helianthus, and this is another really tiny bee about the size of a grain of rice. Rollin's photos are absolutely wonderful, but they don't really necessarily give you a sense of scale. And so this is one of our large digger bees, Haberproda depressa. These guys come out in early spring. You actually might see them out as early as December some years, and you'll often hear them before you see them. These big, fat, really loud gray bees. And then this is one of our mason bees. You can see all the wonderful pollen on her abdomen there. Let's see, who else? Does anybody recognize this bee? Yeah? Okay, I'm guessing most of you have actually seen this bee before and probably thought it was a fly before now. It's actually one of our most common bees in California gardens. We have affectionately named it the ultra green sweat bee. Yeah, it's just absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. So, and this is one of our longhorn bees. It's interesting that somebody up there said that long antennae seem to indicate wasps. But this bee is actually, their common name is given to them by the male of the species, which you can actually, they're sexually dimorphic, which means the males and females look different. So the males have really long antennae and the females have shorter antennae. And that actually works in our favor because it means you can actually pick up the males and hold them around and really impress people. I'll talk more about that later. I'll talk more about that. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I always do that. Does anybody see anything interesting about this bee? Does anybody know what that flower is? Oh, God, you guys are just supposed to be native plant people. Don't say Agapanthus to me. I hate it, yes. Gilia capitata, yes. Sorry, I've got a crusade against Agapanthus. It's not one of my favorite plants. It's everywhere. I was talking to somebody, I'm like, it's in the landscaping manual that you must plant Agapanthus everywhere. Oh, God, don't get me started. So, what's interesting about this is you can tell that this bee has visited two different plants. How do I know that?
Color pollen.
Color pollen.
Where the pollen is.
Where the pollen is, as well as the color of it. So, Gilia capitata, if you didn't know this, has blue pollen.
Wow.
Demonstrate right there. But this bee has yellow pollen up on its thorax. So it's obviously visited two different plants today. So I just like to point this out because you can learn really interesting things about the behavior by focusing on the resources as well as about the plants. One of my fun facts that I learned on this, doing this job, is that cilantro has pink pollen. And I learned that from collecting bees. And I was like, is that pink on its abdomen? It's really fascinating. So this is one of our larger leaf cutting bees in what Claire Kremman has affectionately dubbed the bum up position. Very common. And then this is that Hylaeus I was talking about. Does anybody know what that flower is? Buckwheat. God, I like talking to plant groups. Yeah. This is an Eriogonum flower, so that gives you a sense of just how tiny that bee is. Like, we're seeing the detail of the flowers. I never realized Eriogonum had such beautiful flowers until I looked at that photo. And then this is, does anybody recognize this flower?
Is that Phacelia?
No? I hear some people kicking around up here. It's the red buckwheat. The red buckwheat, Eriogonum grande rubescens, yes. So get a sense of the bee's scale from that. Halictus tripartitus, probably one of the most abundant and common bee species ever. We call it a sweat bee. Anybody know why we call them sweat bees? You guys wondered? So most bees are named for either their nesting habitats or what they actually look like. So like the mast bee, you can see it's got this little yellow clypeus on the front. So that's why it's called the mast bee. This one, obviously named because of its color. Sweat bees are named because in hot, arid environments, you might see bees landing on you, and what they're doing is stopping to drink some of your sweat, because bees need salt as well. And so, it doesn't happen as much here, but in, Arizona and even Southern California areas, you'll start getting swarmed by bees on hot days going after your sweat. Yeah. Okay, so a little bit of nesting. Any questions about the common bee visitors? What does the mining bee do? Excellent question. So the mining bee and carpenter bees are not named because they do carpentry or do mining. Some people, read in descriptions that carpenter bees drill into wood. Bees cannot operate drills. They do not have a drill mouthpiece. What they do is they chew. But mining bees, in very much the same manner, they nest underground. So they excavate, which I'm actually about to show you. So that's why they're named, is because they nest underground. So along the lines with digger bees. They ran out of... Well, just move on to say. So 70% of our bees are ground nesters, and with that, you have to get creative with, you can't call them all just ground nesting bees. So we have the mining bee, the digger bee, sweat bees, of those sorts. And then 20% nest in pre-existing cavities. So in nature, that includes things like abandoned beetle holes, emergences from other bees. They will actually reuse other bee nests. And just any other variety of small cavities they can find. Or they may do what mason bees and some small carpenter bees do, which is excavate pithy stems like rubus and helianthus, the sunflowers, or even the salvias. And then 10% are those kleptoparasites that take over the nests of other bees, which you can't really see it because it's such a small photo, but this is in Costa Rica, but here's a Coelioxys that's actually waiting for the centress to leave so she can go in and lay her egg in there. So. A little sinister, but so a little sinister. I have some people who like to say cuckoo bees are evil bees, and cuckoo bees, the kleptoparasites, are actually really good bioindicators. If you're seeing cuckoo bees in your garden, it means you have a healthy population of their hosts. If they didn't have a large enough and healthy population of their hosts, they couldn't actually use their resources, their nests. So if you're seeing them, it means you're doing something good in your garden. So you want to actually encourage your kleptoparasites. So, nesting requirements have huge implications for habitat garden. So, just to show you some examples, I'm sure many of you have heard of what we call bee condos. They're all the rage. Everybody likes to do them. So this is what it kind of looks like inside of those bee condos, which you're providing for the pre-existing cavity nesters, that 20%. So this is the nest of a leafcutter bee, and you open it up, and does anybody grow roses? Little roses? What about wisteria? I know it's a native plant group, but... Forgive me. So if any of you grow those and you've ever gone out and seen that your leaves look like Swiss cheese, a little perfect semicircle is taken out of them, that's the work of leafcutter bees.
Red buds.
Red buds, yes, red buds, excellent ones for osmia as well. Yeah, red buds. And so that's what these bees are doing. They're basically taking pieces of leaf, not to eat them, but to create brood cells. And so this probably has about 8 to 10 different brood cells, which look very much like this. And so they create this little, cylinder or conical shape. They put a pollen loaf in there, which is pollen mixed with a little bit of nectar. They lay an egg on top, and then they seal it up like a pie. And then they'll make about 8 to 10 of these, and then cap it all off, and those bees will emerge next year. Unlike the honeybees, our native bees don't do any kind of care of the brood after they seal it up. It's kind of a one-and-done deal. That's it. So, let me see. Is there anything else I can tell you about this? Oh, so here's a question people often ask me about the sex and the eggs that are, so obviously these brood cells that are at the base of it, they're like, okay, those are laid first. Do they emerge first? The answer is no. Does anybody know what eggs they lay first? The females lay? Males. Females. Anybody know why they lay females first? Does anybody know that bees can determine the sex of their young? Yeah, I know. We think we're evolved, but we can't determine the sex of our young yet. Yeah, insects, they got it going on. Yeah, they can. Yeah, so when a female mates with the male, she actually withholds the sperm, and then she's the one who decides, am I going to fertilize or not fertilize eggs? So, females take up more resources to grow to maturity. They take more time. Females tend to be larger for most species, so they're laid first and they're provided more resources. During periods of stress, like drought or fire or any variety of just stressful conditions where resources may be lacking, the female bee will actually either lay more males and just fewer females, or she just may lay entirely males because of the resources available. So that also means that males emerge first. Why? So they can grab the females, exactly. In most insect species, the males pretty much exist only for mating purposes. So their goals are to get out early and sit around and wait for the females. That's pretty much it. So just to show you a ground nest, people say 70% of our native bees nest in the ground. I've never seen a bee nest in the ground. Chances are you actually have. So, just to give you a sense, this is what the entrance to a digger bee nest looks like. It's just a little tiny round dot in the ground. So chances are you're walking by them all the time. Here's a sense of scale for this ultra-green sweat bee. It's a penny, and that's how tiny it is. So if you want to look for native bees nesting your ground, a good way to do is just see if you see any insects flying low to the ground, because it's probably either males, 1, looking for females, or 2, females either looking for a nest site or making their way back to it. So, just interesting little tidbits. And of course, the bumblebee nest. Has anybody ever found a bumblebee nest? Yeah, I know Cynthia has. So bumblebees are notoriously weird in their nesting site locations. So bumblebees typically like to nest in things like tussocks of grass and abandoned rodent burrows, and apparently at the base of people's wood piles is a really popular spot. But for our black-tailed bumblebees, we noticed for a long time that they were nesting in birdhouses. And does anybody work with taxonomists? Anybody have a sense of what taxonomists are like? No? It's just a question, because if you work with taxonomists, they're really big on the literature. And if it's not in the literature, they tend to not give it very much credence. So, for a long time, we're talking to Robbin, and Robbin is a bumblebee expert. He just actually published a very robust book on the bumblebee genera of North America. That is what he does, bumblebees. And for a long time, he's like, nope. It's not in the literature, therefore Bombus melanopygus does not nest in birdhouses. Even though we showed him these photos, we're like, look, they're nesting in birdhouses. Doing it. Tell that to the bees that they don't nest in birdhouses. But 3 years ago, a study came out from Canada comparing the relative attractiveness of different birdhouses to Bombus melanopygus. They found that overwhelmingly, Bombus melanopygus prefers chickadee birdhouses. So, chickadee birdhouses, yes. So it is now in the literature, and we can now safely say that Bombus melanopygus uses birdhouses for nesting sites. Okay. It's one of those things when you work with academics that you get really weird little nuances like that, So, but our yellow-faced bumblebee most commonly is going to nest in abandoned gopher holes. Which is such an interesting and particular thing. How do they know it's empty? What? Why that one? Who knows? But. So, you can create bumblebee houses. People like to try to do that, but Robbin informed us that they're only about 10% successful. So don't get discouraged if you don't see any bumblebee nests around your house, even though you have a ton of bumblebees in your garden. They're just really particular. So, okay. Okay, life cycle. So, sorry, any questions on nesting?
If I had a wood pile, when would be the best time to move, if I wanted to move that pile?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So bumblebees are one of our few regularly social bees, native bees. Insect sociality is very, very complex and confusing, but in general, our main social bees that we deal with are the honeybees, European, and the bumblebees. But unlike the honeybee colonies, bumblebee colonies are annual. So honeybee colonies persist each year with the same queen. Bumblebee colonies die off each year, including the queen, the workers, everyone. So what happens is in a few weeks or so, the colony should be producing new queens. And the new queens will overwinter in the old site, and the rest of the colony will die off. And then they'll emerge in about mid-December and go out and seek new nest sites. So pretty much at the end of this year, you can safely move your wood pile. So in general, if you find a bumblebee colony and you're like, wow, you are in the most inopportune location that I could imagine, then just wait till about, December or so, and you can safely move it without, really harming anyone. So, or any of the bees, rather. Any questions?
Yeah, up here. I found they like leaf litter,
Leaf litter.
and they love soap fruit. They go after soap fruit just fantastic.
Huh.
And there used to be our annual twice a year flash sale. They were the soap fruit was by laws. That is absolutely not true. And so yeah, everybody should have a soap
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. So we haven't even gotten to my plant recommendations yet, which I think I have plenty of time. My other thing is I tend to get really caught up in telling stories and don't make it through all my slides. So, but I'm really glad you brought that up because everything that I am going to tell you, except about the biology and ecology of bees, but in terms of recommendations, that's what they are. They're recommendations. And that's what we like to do as researchers. We provide you information based on our research, and then it is up to you to do with it what you will. So you'll notice later on in my presentation, I have a couple non-native plants. And sometimes people go, oh, non-natives, this is a native plant place, And so my whole thing is, we just pay attention to what bees like and then make recommendations based on that. And then it's up to the individual gardener. If you want a native plants only garden, you can do that. If you want, a bee sanctuary with a combination of both, you can do that. If you want a really low maintenance garden, you can do that as well. So just keep in mind everything I'm going to tell you in terms of the gardening is a recommendation. And I do not proclaim to be an expert in every single plant out there. So if I'm so glad Judith brought this up, but pay attention to your native ranges because oftentimes that will determine what will work in your garden. Native bee populations are locally adapted. So certain plants, say it's a coastal plant, if you take it inland, it's probably not going to attract a lot of bees because it's been adapted to the bees in the coastal environments. So that's what I always like to tell people. Yes?
What about mulching versus leaving the ground bare?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, but you're actually skipping ahead a little bit. Let's see, how far ahead am I? We're a little bit ahead on that.
I can wait.
Yeah, okay. Hold on to that. If we don't get to it, bring it up again.
So I had a bumblebee nest in my garden. They were in a rodent hole, I guess a goat hole, and it was really wonderful, but next year there was nothing. So all the females leave?
Well, all the females die off each year,
But
including the queen.
Everyone stay?
None of them stay. Every new year, the queen will go out and seek a new nest site. They don't persist in the same nest site year to year. Why? I'm not really certain, but yeah. So I wouldn't be too concerned. They'll always come back. I mean, we've been trying. We put out bee condos, bumblebee nests, tussocks of grass. I know I have rodent holes out in our garden in Berkeley. I have 141 wonderfully bee-attractive plant types, and the bees all nest right outside on the street and refuse to come into our garden. I'm like, why? Cut all the space. I've got all your plants. So sometimes, it's just, it's an interesting thing because, we hear differing rates of success in bee condos. Some people are like, I put them out and they're swarmed. Other people are like, I put them out and there's nothing. So, again, bees are particular. They're organisms. There's other things at play that we don't always understand. So, okay. So this is just a sense to give you, a sense, rather, of when you develop a habitat garden, the things you have to think about in terms of the life history. So most of our native bees are highly seasonal. And they reflect the plants that they go to. So Andrina, those mining bees we saw earlier, are what we call a spring bee, which means, around February, the males start emerging and the females shortly thereafter. They mate with each other because, solitary nesters, there's not a queen who's producing. So they mate and they go and they start provisioning brood cells. And then by mid-May or so, most Andrina are completely gone. And the adults have died off, and the next generation is developing underground. And then they'll hold over as adults and emerge the next year. So every bee you see out is a full-fledged adult. I get that a lot of tiny bees. Are they baby bees? And the answer is no. You actually don't ever see the immature life cycle stages of the bee. So I have a lot of people who come to my garden talks and they go, I have all these bees in spring and it's wonderful, and then come summer there's nothing. And I say, okay, tell me what you planted. They say, well, I've got Salvia brandigii and Phacelia sicutaria and Gilia capitata and some Ceanothus and Arctostaphylos. And I'm like, great, you've provided a bunch of resources for your spring bees and nothing for the summer bees that come shortly after. So if you want to have bees in your garden, we have a 10-month-long bee season in California. It goes from mid-December to early October, and it's ever lengthening with climate change. It's last year I saw bees flying out in November, which is kind of unheard of, but the flowers were out, the temperatures were very moderate, and so the bees were still out flying. So if you want bees in your garden all year long, you have to provide both pollen and nectar in a staggering order all year long, so the bees don't do what I talked about earlier, which is get up and leave your garden and search for new resources. So, losing my spatial awareness up here. So just to give you, that's just basically a sense that you have to do this staggering, and you have to have both pollen and nectar. So, this is my little plug. Why non-natives? So, as Judith mentioned, non-natives have just, dominated the horticultural trade for a very long time, and they continue to do so. And, one of our audience members mentioned, how do we get more natives into larger areas? Because in some areas, native plant nurseries are harder to come by. We're very fortunate in our region and even Southern California that there's plenty of native plant nurseries we can go to. But I work in some regions where, I can give them a plant list and they're like, I can't find half of these because all I have is big box stores near me. So that's why we do provide information on non-native plants. And the other reason is in the later summer when some of our native plants, aren't, as prolific and there's less diversity, certain select non-natives, not any non-natives, it has to be select non-natives, can provide pollen and nectar during those times when there's fewer native resources. But like I said, it's all up to your own personal tastes and goals in your garden. So, let's see. Bee flower relations. How are we doing on time? Doing okay?
Great.
20 more minutes? Okay. Okay, so what we have found through our 15 years of research staring at bees and plants is that certain plant families are highly attractive to our native bee species. Now, obviously our Asteraceae, the daisy family, the composites, provide both pollen and nectar. And the other thing is bees, you really have to pay attention to types of flowers and flower shapes to know what kind of organism goes to them. So something like epilobium, our California honeysuckle, long tubular red flower. What do you think that's made for? Hummingbirds, exactly. Certain small native bees can get to the stamen, but in general, that flower is created for hummingbirds. So, an Asteraceae with this, beautiful landing pad-like disc is perfect for bees because, they can see it, the resources are easy to get to. So, and then Lamiaceae, our mint family, highly attractive. Nearly anything in Lamiaceae is going to attract native bees. To a lesser extent, Boraginaceae, Polygonaceae, and Rosaceae. So Rosaceae is an interesting one because, take roses, for example. Native roses, fantastic for bees. Ornamental roses, not so great. Any ideas why?
Double-flowered versus simple flower.
Double-flowered versus simple flower. This holds true with certain things like cosmos, the non-native cosmos. We love to mess with things and give things more petals. The more petals they seem to have, the less bees like them. They don't like complex things. It's all about resources and energy versus reward. So if a bee really has to work to get something, for maybe not a great reward, they're probably not going to use it. So that's in Clarkia is another one. Clarkia unguiculata is everywhere in the horticultural trade, and everyone looks different. So the thing is the Clarkias with a lot of petals is not going to be very attractive. But the Clarkia unguiculata that's closer to the wild form, a little less complicated, going to be much more attractive. So I like to throw up these photos because these are two different bees in different bee groups, but they're using the same flower for different resources. So just my little plug for, pay attention to what the bees are doing because sometimes certain bees will use a flower in one way and other bees will use it a different way. So. Let's see. I'm not going to go into floral constancy. It's too much.
Can you tell us how the bees are using them differently?
How are they using them? So, on the surface, this is actually a male Anthophora, and males don't collect pollen. So typically, where normally you would see pollen collecting structures, so on the megachyle, it's on the abdomen. So if you see a bee with any pollen on its abdomen like this, it's going to be within the megachyle family. It's either going to be a leaf-cutting bee or an osmia, which is the mason bee up here. And then most other bees collect pollen on their legs, like that. So this is a male. He obviously is not going to collect pollen, so he's going directly in for nectar. Whereas this is a female osmia, and she's completely ignoring the nectar and going straight for the pollen. So the ways like that. Another thing is, wisteria, the non-native that it is terrible for most of our native bees. Carpenter bees absolutely love it. They're the only bee big enough to actually get in there and break apart that flower to get at the nectaries. But a lot of our leaf-cutting bees love wisteria leaves for their nest brood cell construction. So that's a different way that they're using two entirely different parts of the plant, and it's still providing them resources. So, yeah. Yes?
Could you explain floral constancy?
Okay, I can. I was trying to save a little time because, like I said, I'm only halfway through my slides. So floral constancy, and this is exhibited by all bees, not just our native bees, but even our generalist bees, who will visit a lot of different plants, will exhibit preferences towards a certain type of plant on a certain day. So that means you may get something like our, let's take a bumblebee, for example. It's very generalist, goes to a lot of different plants. But when a bumblebee worker goes out in the morning, she goes, okay, I'm just collecting poppy pollen today. I'm gonna visit every poppy flower I can find, and I'm gonna ignore other flowers, because that's what I want today, poppy pollen. So that has implications when you're planting a garden. So if you plant a big patch of poppies, say 1 meter by meter square, that bee is gonna have to work a lot less to find those resources. So it's going to stay in that general area, and it's going to be easier for them. Whereas if you plant like a poppy bunch here and a poppy bunch there and there, that bee has to go a long distance away. So one, resource intensive for them, but two, planting in that way gives you an opportunity to observe them more. So, so basically it's just the idea that on given days, bees will go after certain flowers and only those types of flowers. So you can adapt your management regime and planting regime accordingly. So, okay, bee-plant relationships. Whew, getting to the actual gardening part. So poppies, this is obviously the Californica, not the coastal variety. It's interesting that Judith brought that up because we had an issue with a farmer who was like, oh, I'll take care of buying the seeds. And we work out in Brentwood, Central Valley-esque on the warmer side. And we show up and they're like, oh, we got the poppy seeds. And it was all the Maritima. And we're like, oh God, this is never gonna work out in Brentwood. It's too hot, it's gonna get outgrown. And sure enough, they planted a bunch of it and not a single bee went to it. They all wanted this variety because that's what's locally adapted out there. So predictable relationships. So while a lot of our native bees are generalists, they do have preferences. So that means that I have spent a lot of time staring at plants and flowers, and after thousands of frequency counts and collections and specimens, I can actually say if you plant California poppies, you're generally only going to get our bumblebees, small carpenter bees, some of our sweat bees, and our mason bees. And that's generally all that's going to visit your poppies. Maybe a few andrena early in the season, but that's about it. Or if you plant something like Ceanothus, and Ceanothus is a wonderful, wonderful insectivore plant. There's just huge numbers of species and cultivars and varieties. It seems to be one of those plants people have really enjoyed creating cultivars and varieties of, and most of them are wonderfully attractive. So this is going to attract just a huge variety of bees. I mean, this is just a small example of andrena, bombus, the massbee, and lasioglossom, but this is really a bee magnet and will collect up to 20 species of bees off it. So. Or you plant sunflower, Helianthus annuus. This is another really good one of an example of the simpler the flower, the better. We have all different types of sunflowers that they've messed with. And in general, our native bees like the simple ones. They don't like the ones with the big stalks and complex flower heads. They don't tend to be very resource rich. They also don't seem to like ones that are tinged with other colors. They seem to generally like yellow. The ones with red on it, we experimented with some of those, completely ignored them. So, but in general, all that's going to visit your sunflowers are obviously our sunflower bee, our longhorn bee, the sweat bees, and a few megachile, and that's generally it. So, I have a huge database of this on our website as well, which is broken down by what are natives, broken down by season, what season they flower in, and then what resources they provide, as well as the most common bee visitors. So don't worry if this doesn't stick in your head. Yes?
So what's your website URL?
Helpabee.org. That's us.
In your program.
Yes, in your program. But yes, helpabee.org. I also have, out on the display, I have specimen drawers of these bees, so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. And there's should be postcards with a starting plant list and some information on how to build a bee condo and stuff like that. I also, if any of you don't like to take your phone out into the wild with you, we developed this small little flip booklet guide to the common bees of California gardens that just kind of goes through, the general genus and what plants are their favorites. We're kind of, we're selling these for like $5 because we're working with A&R to actually develop a more robust copy of this with the UC A&R series, because we're starting to realize that people are, once you get down the general information, people want to put names on things. They want to know what they're seeing in your garden. And, it's really, it takes time and effort, but, you just got to get out your little flip booklet and start looking at things. Okay. How am I doing for time? Oh my god, sorry, I told you guys I never make it through anything. So, Phacelia tensifolia. So, this is a plant that you cannot predict anything that's going to go to it because out of our 15 cities in California, we've collected 65 species of bees off this plant. Yeah, just phenomenal. Out of all the Phacelias, this is the most amazing one. It provides both pollen and nectar. And people like to come to my garden talks and say, give me your top 10 bee plants. And I hate that question because one, it depends on do you want to plant for the entire season, certain seasons, what's your own garden like, do you want natives versus non-natives, I just don't know what you want. But if I had to recommend everybody plant one bee plant, it would be this one. This one's absolutely fabulous, and it actually will outcompete most weedy species. This is what Xerxes Society affectionately calls a smother crop. It's absolutely wonderful. Well, it's just, you can actually seed this very successfully, and if you leave it until it goes fully to seed, chances are you won't have to reseed it for many years. It's very prolific. So, and it's also, I say this hesitantly because I swear nothing is actually deer resistant, but this plant seems to be pretty deer resistant because it's got a lot of little spiky things on it, so generally a good plant to use. Okay, I'm actually getting somewhere here. Okay, so just a little bit about design. We already talked about, needing to provide resources throughout the entire year. This is a beautiful little home garden in Ukiah. We collected 90 species of bees out of this little home garden. It's really tiny. It's not a large garden at all. And I like to throw that up just because it's any size space that you have will work for bees in general, as long as you plant in the sun. So on that note, design a garden with structure. I'm sure most of you are gardeners, but I do talk to certain groups and they say that and they're like, what are you talking about? Basically what I mean is don't plant your big Ceanothus in front of your small annuals. Bees are going to go after things that they can see and that are in the shade. So if you want to plant, large Ceanothus, plant them in the back and put your low-growing things in front. Kind of common sense, but you also have to think about, a plant size. I know people who plant salvias, and when they come in a little 1-gallon pot, they're like, oh, it's a small plant, it'll fit here. And then they put a bunch of things around it, not realizing it's going to grow into a shrub. So, think about things like that, what it's going to look like to maturity. As I mentioned, the floral constancy, plant things in patches. This is the McConnell Arboretum up in Redding. They do a wonderful job in patches. So does the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. Absolutely fabulous in the patches department. Let's see, gardening tips. Okay, don't use pesticides or herbicides. That's my one plug. Pesticides, even organic ones, they are meant to kill things. That's what they do. They are not selective in their capacities to kill things. So generally, if you want to protect any beneficial organism in your garden, we don't recommend using them. If you're having trouble with a plant, the top one is the milkweeds. They attract those aphids, and a lot of people are like, ooh, aphids, and now nothing will eat them because they're all poisonous. And my whole thing is, well, if you're having problems with aphids, maybe you should consider taking your plant out rather than spraying it. Or, if you want to get really resource intensive and do the soapy water trick, you can do that. But in general, not a lot is known about most pesticides' impacts on native bee populations, and particularly ground nesting bees in regards to herbicides. People like to say, oh, herbicides, they target only plants. And you're like, well, we don't know a lot about the chemical components of many things. 2 years ago, there was a 17 billion honeybee die-off in the Central Valley. 17 billion. That's just, I can't even comprehend that number. And they were killed off by a fungicide spray. Something that's it's not even in the same clade, let alone, in the same genus. So you're just like, things that are meant to kill things, kill things. It's an interesting concept, right? So just think about that in your home garden. As gardeners, if you deadhead spent flowers, you're going to, that Phacelia, if you deadhead a Phacelia that's about halfway done flowering, you can actually get it to produce well into August. And then, leave hollow stem standing. This is a Peroschia. And we used to cut this thing all the way back to the ground, and all of a sudden one day I noticed I had pruned back a branch, and all of a sudden there's a little Ceratina nest here. So, just think about that of, native bee, sometimes, may look a little bit messy to leave, like an old fence post or a standing tree trunk, but you're actually providing habitat for a lot of things. So.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I have a lot of tansy leaf Phacelia. Are you saying to deadhead that? or is that a different one? That
No, the tansy leaf Phacelia, yeah. If you have to deadhead it at the right time, which is about when it's halfway done flowering, but you can cut it back and it'll send off a whole new round of flowering.
Really?
Yeah. We like to play around with plants in our garden, see what happens. You can be surprised by them sometimes. Yeah, play around. So, to get to your question about mulch, mulching is really great for a lot of things. Great for people who, don't want to spend a ton of time weeding their gardens, keeps down evaporation, there's things like that. But with 70% of our bees nesting in the ground, you do have to think about the nesting implications. So, what we recommend is don't go crazy or fall into mulch madness or black plastic insanity. So, I would not recommend to anyone to use black plastic, even under mulching, because nothing can get through that. If you do want to do a mulching, kind of a sheet mulching, use cardboard, because after 3 years that'll break down, you can plant directly in it. In general, your mulching requirements and the limitations it can provide for native bee nesting habitat will depend on the context. So say, you are the only person in your entire 1 mile radius who has any bare ground, then chances are you're going to want to mulch less to provide more resources for native bees. Or say that all of your neighbors have a bunch of bare ground areas in their yards, feel free to mulch like crazy. Or maybe you don't want bees nesting in your ground because you don't have to worry about them, feel free to mulch away. Or mulch 70% of your garden and leave 30% of it clear. Really, like I said, recommendations. But the bottom line is if you do thick layers of mulch like up here, native bees can't get through it. So just keep that in mind. Yes.
I have a question. Does it make a difference whether it's a woody mulch or a leaf mulch or compost?
Did everybody hear her? She was asking if having different types of mulch, woody, leafy, of those sorts makes a difference. And the answer is kind of no. If it's too thick and the bees can't get to the actual soil, they're not going to get to it. Like a little bit of mulch is, they can get through, but sometimes a little bit of mulch isn't actually serving its purpose. So in general, the organic ones are going to be better because they'll break down over time anyway. That's why I say just don't use the black plastic. They can't get through that. Pete Villieu at East Bay Wild recommends a mineral mulch because, you can use that for 3 years and then it'll actually enrich your soil and break that down. But yeah, the bottom line is you have to evaluate your own goals in your garden, and if you decide that weeding is way more effort than it's worth and it has to come at the expense of ground nesting bees, then it has to come at the expense of ground nesting bees. But like I mentioned, in our garden, I have plenty of bare ground areas. I use no mulch, I use no pesticides, no herbicides, and all the bees nest outside of my garden. So don't take it personally. Obviously, I take it a little personally, but try not to.
What is mineral mulch?
Mineral mulch, there's a whole variety of kind of different, not gravel, but they're types of mulch that will cover the area but break down over time and leach nutrients into your soil. I'm not sure exactly which ones he was toting the best. Pete Villieu at East Bay Wilds is an absolutely wonderful resource for native plant gardening. So East Bay Wilds is his website, so he might have more recommendations. And he's also very easy to reach on a personal level. So if you email him directly and ask for recommendations on mulching, he's got a ton of them. He's really great. Yes?
I got a tip from Mary Louise Flint, who's
Yes.
a retired IPM person from UC, and she said keep mulch 2 feet back from your house because it'll prevent ant invasions and termites, and then you have this natural barrier or space for the bees at least to consider nesting.
That's a really great, Mary Louise Flint, she's great. She works with us as an editor. But that's a really good idea because then there's also some downsides of mulches, like, those things that we mentioned, can encourage certain pests in your garden. So that's a really good idea is to, just leave strips. Like I said, maybe do 70-30, things like that. Or mulch just around the base of plants. There's things like that. But like I said, everything's just a recommendation, you guys. Do what you will in your own garden. I'm not going to come and check your garden and be like, here you guys, not enough bare ground areas. You get an F. No, not going to happen. So, I think we're almost at the end, so I'll just give my little touch on building bee homes, because I'm sure some of you might go home and do this. So, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of how you actually do it. My one thing I do want to say is, if you build artificial bee condos, you do have to maintain them. So recent research is coming out looking at, do building artificial nest sites, are they actually helping bees, or are we hurting them? Because these types of aggregations are not natural in the wild. So are we aggregating predators, parasites, pathogens with them? Because, you know, some people put out a bee condo. Let me see if I have a photo of it. Oops, I turned it off. There we go. Oh, I don't have it. But at Lake Merritt, there is this beautiful structure they built about 3 years ago. They called it an insect hotel. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's what I call a spider hotel now, because no one maintained it. Because guess what? Other organisms will come in and they will use it, and they will attack any bees that are potentially in there. So what we recommend is, if you're going to build these artificial nests, at least go out, you know, every 2 years and either clean them or replace them. Sometimes it can be as simple as re-drilling holes. And you know, you might sacrifice a bee or two in that process, but the bottom line is, if you don't maintain them, you could actually be hurting bee populations more than you're helping them. So, yes.
So I have one of these artificial bumblebee nests. It's wood, untreated, like you said. I bought it on Amazon. When you say clean, do you mean wash it?
So one of them is washing it. You know, you'd have to like, you know, soap it down, and then you have to leave them out to dry for long enough times. Sometimes it depends, because some, like, you know, if you see our these up here, which are not for bumblebees, but for cavity nesters, these I would actually, in 2 years, I'd completely throw them out. Actually, you know, probably use them in my fireplace or something like that, and then reuse them, because things build up into them anyway. So, and that's the problem, is that that's something we don't know a lot about, is nesting. You know, you see those recommendations everywhere. Nearly any habitat gardening guide you have for native bees suggests putting out bee condos. And the thing is we don't really know the best management practices yet. So to err on the side of caution, we recommend every 2 years either replace them or, you know, try to actually wash them and let them dry out and reuse them. Yes.
Any time of year.
So if you want to minimize the potential impacts on any bees that are coming out, would be for leaf-cutting bees, you're actually going to want to do it right after they emerge in early summer, late spring or so. You'll actually start seeing, with these, it's the leaf-cutting bees, you'll start seeing holes in them when they've emerged. And so if you just kind of go out and you take a peek at them and you look and you say, oh, okay, now's a good time, then it's a good time to start cleaning them thereabouts. Or, you know, after 2 years, pretty much I would say midsummer, just remove them completely. Yeah. But for bumblebees, you're going to want to do it in, you know, end of fall, when their season's pretty much done. So.
Do these bees sting?
Do these bees sting? I didn't even go over my common bee myths. Oh my god. So, do these bees sting? So, it's not really limited to types of bees, but more within bees. Only the females can sting. And this is true of all Hymenoptera. Only the females can sting. Male bees cannot sting. Does anybody know why? Those of you who've heard my talk before can't give the answer. Any ideas? No? Does anybody know what a stinger is?
This is the part of the bee that they use for laying eggs. It's the, I'm trying to think of the right word.
Yeah, I just heard somebody up here say it.
Ovipositor.
Yeah, the ovipositor. A stinger is a modified ovipositor. It's part of the body that lays an egg. Male bees cannot lay eggs, therefore they have no stinger. They cannot sting you. So that means those longhorn bees I was talking about, if you see those spring bees, that really long bees, you can just snatch them out of the air. Really impress people. I just like to say, I just have a way with bees. They just don't sting me. But in fact, I'm actually just holding male bees because they can't sting, which is a great teaching tool, particularly for children, because, you know, there's a lot of fear about bees. You know, oh my God, I'm gonna get stung. Oh my God, I'm gonna get stung. But then once a kid can hold a bee in their hand, it just changes their entire perspective, because it just breaks everything they thought they ever knew about bees. Like, I'm holding a bee? This is amazing. So just interesting little behavioral things that can help break down some of these fears and mysteries about these organisms that not a lot of people know about. And does anybody I know some people live in the South Bay. Anybody in San Jose area? Have any of you seen this really large golden bee?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It's a male valley carpenter bee. That is the male Xylocopa varipuncta, whom we affectionately call the teddy bear bee, because he's large and golden and can't sting you, so you can actually pick him up in your hand and pet him. We like to take him to outreach events. This is great for any of you who are educators. Bees cannot thermoregulate like humans. They need to have a certain temperature to actually get moving in the morning. So what you can do is you can take bees, like the teddy bear bee, put them in the fridge. Do not put them in the freezer. Put them in the fridge for like an hour or two, and they kind of go to sleep. and you can take them out and you can actually use them as a teaching tool. And it takes them very little time, maybe 20 minutes to fully wake up and get warm, and then they'll fly off. But we like to take those to children's outreach events for that purpose. So.
I never see them land on anything. They're
What are they doing? What are they doing? So that's a great question. So this can help you recognize different bees in your garden. So sometimes you'll see certain bees that never seem to visit a flower. And this is true of the carpenter bees and a couple other bees. You'll just see them zipping around. And what they are, those are male bees. They're setting up territories around patches of flowers, as well as patrolling for females and other male bees. So you'll actually see sometimes the males will start chasing each other around, and that's because they're like, get out of my area, this is my female. They're actually patrolling for female bees. And occasionally, for the most part, they use nectar as flight fuel. And so occasionally they'll stop and drink a little bit of nectar to start getting going again. Whereas the females are just visiting flowers for nectar and pollen. So, yeah, I know.
You said earlier that they can't operate drills, so they don't, in the wild, drill these holes, these deep holes.
Yes.
So what does drill the deep hole?
I would say predominantly in the wild, what they're going after is beetle holes, beetle emergence holes. Yeah, I mean, and that's why we say, these are not natural, these kind of aggregations. These kind of cavities are, more widely dispersed throughout. So, it's interesting because most of the cavity nesting bees I find are in hollowed out stems that are previously hollowed out. Osmia and the carpenter bees, the small carpenter bees, Ceratina, they will actually go through and chew out those pithy stems. So they make their own, but in general, I think most leaf-cutting bees use other insect emergences. Or old nest sites themselves.
Would you recommend using bamboo as one of these?
That's a really good question. That is a really excellent question, and we used to use them a lot for bamboo.
I've seen them commercially.
Yeah, we used to use them a lot, and it seems like bees will use them, but now there's questions, like I said, of how good it does at protecting the cells, because bamboo's not native to California. It's not something that our native bees would naturally use. So even though it serves a purpose of being hollow and available, whether it provides enough protection for the actual larva and egg inside is really up for debate, because they're looking right now to see if bamboo versus other types of nesting materials are actually contributing to more rates of predation and parasitism pathogens. Unfortunately, I do not have a set answer on that, but right now, kind of the current thing with leaf cutting for the leaf cutting bee societies are saying, in general, we'll probably want to stop using bamboo so much because, it's interesting because those blocks up there, those are actually one of our farm sites, and they're made out of redwood. And that's something we've noticed is that native bees, when we make artificial nests, tend to have a preference towards native wood. Go figure. Yeah, go figure. Elderberry, yeah. So, we're experimenting with these things. This is one of those aspects that we don't have a lot of information on. And we have general nesting information for groups, but the real specific requirements for specific species really hasn't been sussed out because, one, it's extremely difficult to study these nests in the wild. And two, it's just, there's so much variation that's within it. So that's why it's exciting. If any of you have any, up-and-coming college students or anybody who wants to slake out a PhD or something, tell them to go into bees. There's no shortage of research questions in bees. Yes?
So if you have property that's like partly flat with bare ground and everything, and partly a lot of dead trees and brush pile, is it really stupid to make a bee houses?
I would say it's not necessary. You're providing a lot of great habitat there. And you brought up a really great point that I didn't touch on. So, in general, I'm talking about urban gardens, but proximity to wild habitat can have a huge impact on your native populations and reservoirs. So we're experiencing this a lot in agricultural areas. Urban gardens are absolutely wonderful reservoirs, but so we're finding that proximity to native habitat will, of course, increase your population and rates in your garden. So, if you have any native habitat that is already out there, you're already way ahead of everybody else. Doing great. So, and that's my one other thing is bees in the wild right now. I get a lot of questions about that in the drought. How are bees doing in the wild? And in general, native bees have remarkable adaptations to deal with periods of stress. Honeybees right now are experiencing a lot of problems. I'm sure you all have heard about that, but the drought has hit honeybees particularly hard because honeybees need outside sources of water for their hives. Whereas native bees have these adaptations like they go into a diapause. They actually hold over during periods of stress as adults in their brood cells, and they won't emerge until conditions are correct. And one researcher did a study. He took a brood cell, I forget of which specific species, put it in his desk for 11 years. And in 11 years, he got the temperature conditions, the moisture conditions, got everything correct, and that bee hatched out. So, yeah, native bees have remarkable, I mean, drought is a natural part of California's history, and our native bees have evolved to deal with those factors. It's really amazing, yes.
We have a bunch of paper wasps in our garden, and I'm wondering if wasps compete with bees?
Ah, great question. So, in general, wasps are awesome in your garden. Everybody should encourage their wasps. They're really great. But in general, no. The only competition you're really going to see is occasionally between bee species, and only if resources are lacking. So in general, if there's enough pollen and nectar in your garden, bees are generally going to ignore each other. As with the wasps are going after the pest insects in your garden and a little bit of nectar. So in general, they're not going to attack them. Because people have concerns over, like in Asia, they have the Asiatic hornet that gets into honeybee nests and decimates the hives. But we don't really have any specialist wasp bee predators. Spiders in your garden are going to eat far more bees than your wasps are going to interact with them at all. So, but it's a natural part of it.
We're going to cut off.
Oh, we're going to cut off. I'm here all day, you guys. I'll keep talking all day.
And we do have a Q&A at the end, so thank you, Sarah.
My one more thing, like I said, Sherry was very concerned that I would have to stretch out time. I obviously don't have any issue doing that. So I do, you'll see probably online, I think, my full PowerPoint is up here, but really the only thing after this were different plant profiles of specific good Bay Area plants with a little bit of a breakdown of what bees you can expect. So they'll be online, I promise. We gotta learn about water and stuff.
Thank you. Arvind.
What are the bee boxes outside?
The bee boxes. I brought three specimen drawers, 2 from Berkeley and 1 from Mill Valley. And those are just bees that we collected as part of our urban survey work. So you guys can get a sense of, threw up these beautiful photos with no sense of scale. So you guys can actually see like, oh, that's what I'm seeing in my garden. No wonder. So, yeah.
Do not open them.
Yeah.
Do not touch the bees.
Yeah, please don't take them. We have little kids who go out and like all of a sudden, they've got bees in their hands. And you're like, what are you doing? So.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I have some time. Thank you. Oh my God. Okay, so we'll just go through this quickly. Oh wait, why am I doing that? We're going over there. I have this thing. So we'll actually, a lot of these are on the postcard that are outside, but these are just broken down by the different bee seasons. So obviously you see in late winter, we're going to rely on our Ceanothus, our Arctostaphylos, and these are some of the non-natives. Like I said, I threw up a couple non-natives in there. So here, we'll actually just skip through to some of these. Like I said, Ceanothus, if you have the space to grow Ceanothus, you should absolutely do it. It's a wonderful insectivorous plant of all varieties. Really important early season pollen source, and it only provides pollen. So that's another important factor is not all plants provide both pollen and nectar. So you need to consider that in your garden. And all our plant lists online have which resource it provides. So, let's see. Salvia mellifera, wonderful bee plant, and it's closely related cousin Salvia brandigii. Early season, this is another one that you can really manage it for nesting purposes. If you, deadhead spent flowers, you don't have to deadhead all of it because they're pretty prolific in their flowering, but if you deadhead them, you're creating really great nesting sources for those small carpenter bees. And in fact, if you go around and you clip them, I can almost guarantee you, if you go there in midsummer when they've dried out, you're gonna see little black Serotina butts sticking out of them. It's really cute. Like I said, Salvia brandigii, I didn't have a good distance shot, but it grows very much the same as that Salvia mellifera. Just it flowers a little bit later, and it's got these beautiful purple flowers. And there's a lot of wonderful native sages out there that are really, really attractive to native bees. Let's see, Gilia capitata, as I mentioned, which I don't know if Judith or anybody else has a different experience, but for the last couple years, our Gilia capitata has refused to grow. And I can only assume that it's just being really particular about, I want my rainwater and things like that. We've tried transplants, everything, it hasn't been growing. But in good years, this is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful bee plant.
Mine did great.
You did great. Yeah, so yeah, ours has done terribly. It's done terribly in a number of our locations. But yeah, has that blue pollen. It's really important early season source. It's really gorgeous. There's another one, Gilia tricolor. It's a little less attractive to other bee species than Gilia capitata, but it's also a really good option for your mining bees. And like I said, experiment in your garden. Sometimes we have plant lists and people say, well, you don't have this plant on your list and it does great in my garden. And I say, great. It's great that it does well in your garden, but we may have tested that plant in 15 other gardens and it didn't do so well. So we also have a list of what we call inconsistent attractors. And so something like, oh God, what's the new name of it? It used to be Lotus scoparius. I refuse to call it its new name. It's a terrible name. I know, I don't like that name. I'm going to keep calling it Lotus scoparius as long as it's such a better name for it. But that plant in the wild and in hotter areas is just the most wonderful bee magnet ever. If you put it into most home gardens, it doesn't do anything at all. So that's something that even though I know it's a great bee plant in some locations, I don't recommend it widely. But like I said, experiment with things in your garden. See what works there. So, as I mentioned, the penstemon, we recommend the native variety, but there are also some non-native varieties, penstemon midnight, which is also really good for a lot of our different bees. Gum plant, Grandelia, I cannot say enough nice things about Grandelia, except for the fact that it is really, really, really hardy and likes to spread very readily, which is great for a lot of the habitats I work in, but for your home garden, do keep that in mind that it will spread very rapidly, which is nice. You can actually repot them very easily. But so we use 3 different species, Camporum, stricta, and hirsutula. They all seem to have the same relative attractiveness. There's also the coastal variety that out in the coast, I'm forgetting the exact species name, but there's a coastal gum plant that does really well out there for native bees. So yeah, if you have to plant, this is one of the few later blooming native plants as well. It blooms well into fall, whereas a lot of our native plants are done by, usually July, early August or so. So, Coreopsis, there are native and non-native varieties. The grandiflora and lanceolata are the ones we use most commonly. Really, really great for your sweat bees and your longhorn bees in the summer. And this is another one that we have experimented with of just completely ignoring it, particularly the grandiflora. And I can completely ignore grandiflora, just giving it a little bit of spring and summer water, and it does absolutely phenomenally and will just reseed very readily. So, like I said, the Phacelia, plant it, it's great. That's all I have to say about that. Lavenders. So lavenders are a plant that are one of the few non-natives that a lot of native people seem to be okay with. So out of the 400 different types of lavenders that we have, we primarily use Stoiches, the Spanish lavender, the French lavender, Lavandula Provence, and then the English lavender, Lavandula angustifolia, I think that one, yeah. And so these are one of the few non-natives that I say is absolutely phenomenal. We've collected 60 species of bees off of those 3 lavender types. But it's interesting because if you think about the native range of a lot of these lavenders, they're from very similar climates to ours. They're from the Mediterranean region. So, and I say that because I really want to impress into people's head that you can't choose any non-native plant. You can't actually choose certain types of lavender because they won't necessarily be attractive. It has to be the right ones. Same with salvias. There's a lot of non-native salvias in circulation, but there's select non-native salvias that are attractive, and there's other ones that aren't attractive. So you can't just go into your nursery and pick any non-native, salvia that you want and have it attract. So that's my one thing. You can plant non-natives, but it has to be the right ones. So, and my other thing, talking about grandelias, go back a second. Grandelias are a great segue point to not all native plants are necessarily good for your garden, because if they're not in their native ranges, they will take over and become invasive locally to your own garden area. In my garden, that happens to be Symphyotrichum chilensis. Does anybody? Oh yeah. all these people. That was formerly Aster chilensis, if anybody knows that. That plant, once put in the ground, it is a really great insectivorous plant that's native. That thing will just, I swear, its roots are under my entire quarter-acre garden. It's absolutely everywhere. I've waged war against it. I've hacked its root balls like crazy, and it will not go away. So even though it is a great bee plant that does really well, I don't really recommend it because it just has a mind of its own. So think about that, and that's why it is important to think about what is locally native, because even things that are native to California may not be good for your area. So, one more plug in that regard. Let's see, I think I'm almost done. Lavender, cosmos, this is my other non-native. I like to put cosmos in here because 1, they will flower late into the summer, and 2, has anybody ever grown cosmos? Yeah, have you ever gone out early in the morning on a summer day and seen bees there? No? So, Cosmos biopinatus, if you go out early on a summer day, you will probably find a couple longhorn male bees sleeping in your flowers together. You can go up and you kind of pet them. They're really cute. One time I went out and we counted 13 male bees sleeping together in a patch of flowers. It's really cute. Yeah. Okay, and the sunflowers, of course. Sunflowers are great. We recommend the Delta variety, the branchy one, not with the thick stalk that they grow for horticultural and other purposes. You really want to get those beautiful branching native varieties that grow everywhere in the Central Valley. So, and we don't have to talk about any of this. These are all the areas we worked in the garden. So, anyway. Flower findings. Oh, I have these 2 postcards outside, and this has a plant list on the back of it. And then our funders, and then I'm done. Okay. Thank you, other speakers, for letting me know.